The question of who I am has definitely dominated my life. There's so much ambiguity and unknown. Who do I look like? Where did I start from? What have I left behind? One recurring fear, and it's definitely a fear, what if my biological mother and father are looking for me and I'm just sitting here, not doing anything at all? I'm not the only one that comes back to Vietnam. There are thousands of people that are constantly searching for those missing pieces.
Saigon, April 1975. The frantic final days of a capital about to fall to the enemy.
The war in Vietnam finished exactly 50 years ago. Towards the end of the war, there was a sense of urgency to get people out of Vietnam, and especially the children that had been abandoned or orphaned or separated from their families.
The Ford administration announces Operation Baby Lift, a humanitarian effort to rescue Vietnamese orphans.
Operation Baby Lift was the largest humanitarian adoption program ever. Approximately 3,000 children were airlifted out of Vietnam.
Prior to that, there were a few hundred children that had already arrived in Australia, and I was one of those. And there was an archive of me with my adopted father at the airport.
Just like Sue, we've been searching for our birth family.
Our parents are ageing, we're ageing. Yeah, there is a certain amount of urgency to find out our history.
This next trip to Vietnam is really the last big push for us to make connections with our mothers and fathers before time runs out. So right now, I'm in the final stages of preparing to return to Vietnam with a group of adoptees.
Hi Bart, how you going?
Hey.
To let family know that as adoptees, we're still searching. We'll be going right back to basics, no fancy cars, just riding our bikes through the Mekong area.
We will be asking mothers to DNA test if they come up to us to try and find their missing children.
I'm nervously excited about the anxiety of possibly discovering something.
Sue has an incredible passion to gather us as adoptees together and to support us.
I think it's like we're an exclusive sort of family in a weird way.
I feel really proud of you guys. So I've spent the last few decades working with adoptees to link them with their birth families.
And I can't say thank you enough to you, Sue.
Yeah, no, absolute pleasure. By helping other adoptees search for their origins, it helps me fill that void. So that void and that space around my identity has been around me from as long as I can remember, from a very young age.
This is an interesting one. Just a couple of days after you arrived.
Yeah.
Asian war orphans fly to WA.
I arrived in Perth on the 25th of May 1974. My adoptive parents were Marlene and Richard.
We were very aware of what was happening in Vietnam. It was a television war, constantly in the news, and we knew about the terrible situation with the children. There were over 1 million orphans, and so we wanted to do something to help. And this is the adoring brothers.
Yeah, that's pretty cute.
Getting ready for bed.
I came home from school one day and Sue, my new sister, had arrived, and I remember that I used to rush home from school every day to play with her. She really rounded the family, made it complete.
So growing up within my family with my brothers, I never felt there was any difference between us. But I was always really conscious of how the world saw us.
I would introduce Sue to newcomers and I'd say, "This is my daughter Sue." And they'd look at me and say, "This is your daughter Sue?" But never in a really negative way. It was just, "Are you sure?"
I don't think my mother ever really understood the depth of confusion that those interactions created, but I also had a very strong connection around preserving my family. I knew deep within myself what it was like to experience losing your family. The worst thing that I could ever think about was now losing this family.
Unfortunately, my husband Richard died when Sue was 9 years old, and so that was a very traumatic time for her. There was a feeling of abandonment again.
And I just felt like, am I worthy of having a mother and a father? Why can't I have that? Why is it there and then gone? That's hard to describe. So getting through the following years was really tough. So I responded by just putting my head down, completed my interior architecture degree, and when my daughter was born, that really changed the way I reflected on myself and my origins. It was my time to step in and open some of those doors, start looking. Yep, so this was probably the only document that I exited Vietnam with. It's a Vietnamese passport that was issued. It states my name, which says Luiten.
When I was born, that was really a pivotal moment for my mum.
I went to the state office here and said, look, do you have any other documents?
I understand her drive to find her biological family, even though obviously she has a really loving adoptive mother and adoptive family.
One of the interesting pieces of information that came out in that request was a translation of the registry of birth. It gives me my mother's name, so it says Luti Han. It was about a year or so after my daughter was born. I really started thinking of going back to Vietnam. So I'd spent quite a bit of time collecting information in preparation for going back to Vietnam, and it became really obvious to me, at least, that there was one door that I'd been really hesitant to walk through, and that was around really reaching out and having a discussion with Vietnam veteran. So as a teenager, my adoptive mother cautioned me around disclosing to Vietnam veterans that I was from Vietnam in case it triggered any trauma. It was always a really unsettling feeling to think that just by being me, that I might trigger some traumatic memory in a Vietnam veteran. And given that a lot of Vietnamese adoptees had fathers that were Vietnam veterans, how would I feel if I discovered that my father was a Vietnam veteran, and how he would feel about me? So I said, well, it's a safe person to have that conversation with.
Hello. G'day. How are you? Good to see you. Sue came into my office and I could see that she was quite tentative.
So I brought along the article which first tweaked for me that I might get in contact with you. One of these guys is you. Which one is you?
Good-looking bloke up there in the left-hand corner. There'd been an article that covered my return to Vietnam and the experiences that I went through. I was on a patrol when I trod on a landmine. I lost my legs, and in 1990 I decided I wanted to go back to Vietnam. It was a very rewarding trip, but Sue was quite challenged about going back.
One of my best friends, her father was a Vietnam veteran.
Yes, I remember.
And of course I'd been really very much aware of his trauma.
I just wanted to encourage you to go back with some confidence. I just think it was really important for you to go back and find the things that you were going to find.
And so then I realised that I didn't have anything to be scared about. So shortly after meeting with Graham, I was heading off to Vietnam for my first trip back. When I first went back in 2001, my senses were just in overload. Looking out into the street and smelling and feeling and hearing all the sounds, it was quite overwhelming. Trying not to look, but wanting to look at everyone, see if I'm looking in a mirror. I'm trying to look at them to see whether I recognise them. I'm terrified that someone might recognise me. I asked the taxi guy what is this address, and showed him the paperwork that I'd brought, and we realised that it was the maternity hospital. I walked into the hospital and they led me to meet an elderly nurse, and she introduced herself as Sister Marie Vincent. She gave some places to go and visit, 2 district offices where births and records used to be kept. The most beautiful thing before she went, she gave me a hug and she said she had seen and cared for thousands of babies and hundreds of babies that had died. But she'd always wondered what had happened to the children that had left Vietnam. And I was the first adoptee ever to come back and find her. I felt that my journey had, for the first time, been a piece in someone else's puzzle. So I followed Sister Marie's advice. I was able to get a copy of my original birth certificate, and in that there was an address of my mother's residential address. And I came here to the location in that document, and what I found is now a sprawling metropolis. Once was a rural street just at the end of the airport. So that was hugely disappointing. I'm thinking, that's probably the needle in the haystack moment. But I kept on searching, and I went to Sancta Maria Orphanage, where I was before I came to Australia. I felt an instant connection to the space. Just being here, I can sense the ghosts of what it was before. Yeah, it's quite overwhelming, I guess, think about that. There was people that lived there who had grown up there. They were still there because they had nowhere else to go. And it was sad, it was confronting. Just that moment of thinking, how easy could it have been that I was you and you were me? By the end of the trip, I just felt like this was one of my homes, this place where I could support the breadth of the multiplicity around about my identity. I didn't have to be Australian, I didn't have to be an Asian in Australia. I had a legitimate connection to Vietnam.
It's really good. Yeah, I was thinking the other night too. It's 20 years since we've known each other. Imagine all that time. And we're still working with adoptees.
Yeah, I know. Not long after my first trip, I learnt of another adoptee, Mi Hung, who was actually going back to Vietnam long term.
I mean, it was a really big decision for me to return to Vietnam. It's something I'd wanted to do for many years.
Sue and I, we had both begun searching for our families, so it was just wonderful to be able to connect with another adoptee, understanding what I was going through.
I remember when I met you how fortunate I thought you were. Mi Hung was an older child when she came to Australia, and that made a huge difference in her search.
Because I was 5 when I left, I still had so many memories, and I remembered the area where I used to live. When I returned, I went to that area, and my childhood friend and her mother lived there, and they recognised me. And they called my mother, and within 10 minutes we were reunited. I knew my life was here now. I'm Vietnam.
There was a lot of media around her reunion. So Mi Hung's story gave myself and other adoptees a sense of hope that we too might be able to find our mothers. But at that time, searching in Vietnam was really ad hoc. There was no systems or support for us to do that.
When I went back to Vietnam many years ago for the first time, I got very little information from Sancta Maria, and I hit a brick wall, basically.
You go across there and who do you ask? Who do you go to? No one knows.
It was really important to let the people in Vietnam and the communities know that we were coming back and searching.
After the American War, thousands of children and babies were taken out of the country and relocated to different regions of the world, hundreds of them in Australia. So thank you very much for being here today.
40 years from the end of the war, we had the opportunity to go on Vietnam TV and talk about looking for our mothers and connections.
Let's start with Sue, maybe.
I left Vietnam at the age of 4 weeks old, so I was very, very young.
So our hope was that either someone would see it and that would be a mother searching, or that they would know somebody and put them in touch with us.
We need a system within Vietnam to have a database of birth mothers in Vietnam.
After Talk Vietnam aired, we had a mother contact the show, the producers, and she believed that one of the people on our panel might be her child. And so she came up to Saigon and we did a DNA test. It was probably one of the most emotionally gruelling things I'd ever really done. I'm trying to swab the inside of her mouth and I can just feel her whole body shaking. It wasn't a match, unfortunately. Around that time, we became aware of certain people that were trying to take advantage of both adoptees and of birth mothers coming forward, and most shockingly, faking the results of DNA tests. Mi Hung and I were aware that things could be done better and safer. So we came up with Vietnam Family Search, that was to be a non-for-profit organisation run by adoptees.
So at the time we started Vietnam Family Search, I had no idea about the complications of my own story. In 2018, out of the blue, a woman who had seen my reunion story sent me a very unexpected message.
She said something like, "Oh, just letting you know, I've just watched your YouTube documentary and that woman is not your mother."
In that instant, I felt like I'd been hit by a truck. I had lived with this family in Vietnam for 14 years, and not one moment did I ever suspect she was not my mother. And what I learned was that when my mother gave birth to me, she had a severe hemorrhage. My grandmother asked these two women to take me to care for me, and one of these women ran away with me. To cut a long story short, after receiving that first initial text message, the following day, I was reunited with my real mother, but I wasn't going to make the mistake this time by not DNA testing. So that day, I took my mother and we did a DNA test, and it came at 99.999% that she was my mother.
The emotional toll on Mi Hung was huge. You know, the deception. So Mi Hung's story really highlights the need for being careful. I think the reason why I was really nervous about doing a DNA test to begin with was probably because I was equally interested in finding out who I was related to, but also equally terrified.
I've been working with Sue for about 8 years now. I help people navigate DNA and teach them how to understand their DNA matches.
Okay, let's have a look.
I'd been encouraging Sue to take a test for years and years. She kept procrastinating, making excuses. So we had a dinner party last year in around October, and I took a test with me.
As soon as I arrived, she asked the most unusual question. It's like, "Hi, how are you?" But it was like, "No, have you eaten?" And I went, "No." She goes, "Good, spit in here."
So she did it, and I put it in my handbag and I sent it off.
But I thought I just wanted you to explain really what I'm looking at.
Sue's results came back as 100% Vietnamese, and she was very excited and shocked.
I'd always assumed that my father was a Vietnam veteran, so that laid the question to rest.
I'm monitoring your DNA all the time to see if you get a big close match come up. A few months later, she got a really good ping on a DNA, which is possibly a second cousin. That would mean that they're descended from the same great-grandparents. We're trying to contact the match at the moment to try and find out where she's living, what country she's in.
So that was amazing. 50 years of never having any sign of a human being that is actually related to me. So it's like a tree with roots. I finally found that I was not so lopsided. And that's even before I've even contacted this person.
So we've sent off messages to this woman and we're just waiting on a response. But eventually one day you will get that golden match and I will call you at 2 o'clock in the morning obsessively until you answer the phone.
There are thousands of adoptees that now have put their DNA into the search engines, but unfortunately we're only looking at, in a matter of hundreds of DNA tests having been completed by Vietnamese mothers.
Most people in Vietnam, they haven't got the means to actually purchase a test.
So one of the main goals with this trip back to Vietnam and riding through the community is to encourage that safe place for Vietnamese mothers to come forward and take part in the DNA testing.
Yep, they're all in here. Also, so through customs. Well done.
It was great to be back on Vietnam soil.
There's one kit per package.
We brought a couple of hundred DNA kits in preparation for a couple of stops along the way.
So our goal is to get into as many of the provinces that have the most orphanages back in the 70s.
Get your photo and come this way. Also want to make sure that you respect local traffic.
Our group consisted of 13 adoptees and their support people for a planned 5-day bike ride through the Mekong. So we have some people that have come all the way from Holland and England and America and Australia.
We've got a 287 kilometre bike ride. We're very excited about that.
When we set off, we had no idea how many women might actually come forward. It was very hard for me to think about what I might hope for.
I have just that hope, that glimmer of hope of finding a relative, maybe not my mother, but maybe just a relative.
I'm looking for my birth mother. If not my birth mother, Bart, Sue's, or anyone on that bike ride or other adoptees.
Why are we on the wrong side of the road?
Mi Hung lives now permanently down in the Mekong area, and so she was able to come and join us.
Hey, this is exciting, Sue.
It was emotional, just so wonderful to be with fellow adoptees riding for a purpose.
It's only been like 2 days and the group's bonded really well. There's a lot of amazing storytelling at the moment, you know, sharing our stories.
So along the way, Sue's been organising us to meet with locals.
Before the first formal stop, we had done some background communications within the community around our purpose for visiting. We knew there was going to be sensitivities around DNA testing.
For those women who were separated from their babies, if they came forward on that day, it could be quite shameful, it could be quite embarrassing for them.
We had organised care packs for the community and we were welcomed by the local community leader. Someone in a government position said, "We miss you, we consider you our children and we welcome you back to Vietnam." And that was incredibly powerful.
I think what was freaky was standing and looking out and seeing mature-age Vietnamese locals, and I eyeballed one lady and was like, "Wow, that's Mum." Like, it was freakish. That's just the brain just freaking me right out at the moment.
Look, I've had exactly the same feelings, and talking to the others in the group, they're thinking exactly the same. We're all thinking, could this be our mother?
No one came forward that day. However, within 24 hours after we had left, we had a request. So it's been really encouraging that We've had 20 to 25 mothers already come forward and ask for DNA kits, and we're just assuming that that will continue. The snowball effect will continue, the word of mouth, mothers talking to mothers.
When we found out that DNA kits were requested, it's like, whoa, the brain starts playing mind games, and I think, well, maybe that lady that eyeballed me was my mother.
I think there's a high chance of finding some type of relative for one of the people in our group. I really am very hopeful.
The trip solidified us as a very special bonded group. So the last day of the ride, it was both a little bit sad, but I also felt this overwhelming sense of just pride, like a parent, the mother duck. It was difficult for me to pin down any particular feeling. I think there was so much going on, and I still had to stay on my bike, you know? That was a really important thing in the back. Don't fall off my bike.
We're almost there. 3K's out, we're almost there. We're almost finished.
Hello, Chin-chow. How you feeling, bro?
Yeah, it's the whole happy sadness.
Yeah, that's how I feel. Yeah, it's all good to be weird, like coming to the end of such a ride. Wow, look at this. We're coming through like a flower market or something. Beautiful. Absolutely stunning.
There's nothing quite like going through all of those emotions and physical experiences together.
It's a unique experience that's, it won't be repeated, but it won't ever be forgotten. So, mixed emotions.
As an adoptee driven to look for my mother, that journey can be incredibly lonely. But, you know, after the ride, no matter how lonely that journey is, there's a community there that can respect each other and hold each other. There will always be something very, very special about our group.